I knew something was wrong the second my key refused to turn. It was a cold Monday morning in late January. The kind of cold that hangs in the air like a breath you can't exhale. I had just returned from the hospital, still in the same clothes I'd been wearing for 2 days, still carrying the same small bag I'd packed in a hurry. I had watched my husband, Mark, die in the cardiac unit just 12 hours earlier. I wasn't ready to face the silence of our house, but I also wasn't ready for what I saw instead. I stepped onto the porch and slid my key into the front door. It jammed. I pulled it out, tried again. Nothing. My heart stuttered. I checked the spare key, the one hidden behind the loose porch stone. Still no luck. It was like the lock had forgotten me, or even worse, rejected me. That's when I noticed the curtains. The white linen ones I'd made myself were gone, replaced by thick, heavy panels in a floral print I had never seen before. My stomach dropped. I peered closer through the narrow gap between the curtains and the wall. Inside, our living room was cluttered with cardboard boxes. A pink velvet pillow sat on my reading chair, and a teacup I didn't recognize was on our coffee table. And then I saw her. Eleanor, my mother-in-law. She was sitting in my reading chair, wearing a dark blue cardigan and a smile that sent ice crawling down my spine. She was sipping tea from the special china set Mark and I had saved for years to buy. Across from her, casually tossing throw blankets into a basket, was Olivia, Mark's younger sister. They were laughing, acting like they owned the place, like I didn't exist, like my husband hadn't just died the night before. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, my fists trembling. My throat felt raw. After what felt like forever, the door cracked open. Eleanor stood there, her arms folded tightly across her chest, composed and calm. "Sarah," she said, tilting her head. "Didn't expect you so soon. What's going on?" My voice shook. "Why can't I open the door?" Her smile didn't waver. "Because, dear, you don't live here anymore." My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I blinked at her, sure I had misheard her. "Excuse me?" Eleanor's smile didn't go away. "Mark paid for this house. My son, not you. There was no prenup, no child, and no real contribution on your part. It's time this house returned to his real family." For a moment, I thought the cold I felt was from the weather, but it wasn't. It was coming from her. "I'm his wife. We bought this house together. I refinanced it when his business failed." "Oh, please," Eleanor cut me off, waving a dismissive hand. "You played house while he worked. Now that he's gone, your lease is up." Behind her, Olivia appeared with 2 of my serving plates. "You left the side door unlocked when you went to the hospital," she said with a smirk. "We figured you wouldn't mind." I felt my knees wobble. I laughed. Not out of humor, but the kind of hollow, stunned disbelief that bubbles up when reality snaps too sharply to bear. "What's so funny?" Eleanor narrowed her eyes. I steadied myself, wiping a tear that I wasn't even sure came from sadness anymore. "You're unpacking pillows and pouring tea in a house you think belongs to you, but you have no idea what you've just stepped into." The smile on Eleanor's face faltered, just for a second. It was the only crack I needed. I turned and walked back to my car. My keys were useless now, but I had something better, something she didn't know about yet. And by the time I was done, Eleanor would wish she had never touched a single teacup in my kitchen. 2 years earlier, almost to the day, I sat at the edge of our front porch.
I was watching Mark, my husband, run his hands through his hair in frustration. It was January then, too, just colder, darker. His small business had collapsed the week before. The bank had frozen his accounts, and his credit score had tanked. I remember the way he couldn't look me in the eye when he said it. "They might take the house, Sarah." Mark wasn't a weak man, but that day I saw him completely broken. It was the same house Eleanor now claimed belonged to the real family. I made a decision the next morning, quietly, without a word to Mark. I got dressed, drove to the credit union, and started the refinance process. I moved the mortgage into my name, using the small nest egg I'd been saving since I left my interior design job years ago. I hadn't told anyone, not Mark, not my parents, and certainly not Eleanor. She would have used it as proof that he had failed as a man. The process took weeks. I picked up a freelance job to start making the payments. Mark never asked where the mortgage confirmations were going. He was too busy recovering emotionally and physically. I just kept things afloat. I fixed the faucet. I budgeted the groceries. I painted the hallway. I watched our home survive on the strength of my silence. Eleanor, of course, never knew. She only visited on holidays and never stayed long. She hated our small house, thought our life in the suburbs was too quiet, too simple. I'd hear her voice echo through the guest room, "Mark, you were meant for more than this." And Mark would just smile that tired smile and whisper to me later in bed, "She just doesn't understand peace." I never wanted to confront her. Not then, not even now. I just wanted space to grieve, to be alone in the only place that still smelled like him. Instead, she had changed the locks. I sat in my car outside the house for a long time after that confrontation. The January air seeped into my coat, but I didn't move. I didn't cry. It was like my body didn't even know how to react anymore. How do you process being widowed and homeless on the same day? Eventually, I drove to a motel just off the highway. It was a place that reeked of bleach and mold and something vaguely chemical. I used Mark's emergency credit card, the only one still active, and rented a room for 3 nights. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my bag. I hadn't packed clothes, just hospital papers, a book I never opened, and the last voicemail Mark left me the night before his heart gave out. I played it once, twice, then I shut my phone off. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept picturing Eleanor sitting in my chair, Olivia eating off my plates, and the hallway filled with boxes of their things. They hadn't even let his body go cold before staking their claim. The next morning, Tuesday, I woke up to the sound of church bells. I sat up slowly, brushed the knots out of my hair, and stared at the blank motel ceiling. My fingers ached from clenching the sheets all night. My throat burned. And then I did something I never imagined myself doing. I picked up the phone. I picked up the phone and called the funeral home. "Good morning," a gentle voice answered. "St. Francis Memorial?" "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "This is Sarah Monroe. I need to update the guest list for Mark Monroe's service." A pause. "Of course, Mrs. Monroe. What changes would you like to make?" I didn't hesitate. "Remove Eleanor Monroe and Olivia Monroe from the list." Another pause. Longer this time. "Understood." I ended the call before she could ask why. It wasn't spite. It wasn't vengeance. Not yet. It was a boundary. The first one I had drawn in over a decade of holding my tongue. And for the first time since Mark died, I felt something that almost resembled control. Tuesday afternoon, I returned to the house. Not through the front, but by circling the block and parking discreetly behind the row of hedges. I waited and watched. Eleanor's car wasn't in the driveway. No sign of Olivia either. The side door, the one leading from the laundry room to the back porch, had always had a faulty latch. Mark had meant to fix it for months. I knew how to slip it open without a sound. Inside, the house smelled different. Not bad, just foreign. The lavender air fresheners I hated were everywhere. My framed photos had vanished from the hallway walls, replaced by landscape prints I didn't recognize. There was a sharp pang in my chest as I realized someone had rearranged the throw pillows on the couch. Mark's side of the sofa was empty. No blanket, no coffee mug, no trace. I didn't have time to mourn. I had to move quickly. Mark's office was a small, windowless room filled with wires, books, and the smell of his cologne. Eleanor hated that space. She called it a digital junkyard. That's why I figured she wouldn't touch it. I was right. The room was just as he left it. Papers stacked into columns, receipts half sorted, and USBs labeled in his neat, all-capital handwriting. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Then I went to work. Top drawer, receipts from a freelance job. Second drawer, business cards, old flash drives, and a sticky note. I rifled through them all, unsure what I was looking for, just chasing a memory or a signature. And then I saw it. A slim black folder wedged between two instruction manuals on his desk. Across the top, in his unmistakable hand, post-nup. Do not discard. I froze. We never signed a prenup. We married in our 30s, broke but in love, trusting each other completely. But a post-nup? I opened the folder slowly. Inside were 3 printed pages on legal letterhead. I scanned for my name, his name, signatures, and there it was. Under a highlighted clause, in the event of the husband's passing, all jointly owned assets, including real estate, are to be transferred wholly to Sarah Monroe unless otherwise specified in a last will and testament. There was no will, but this was binding. At the back of the folder, I found a folded sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mark's casual slant. If you're reading this, it means something awful has happened. If Mom tries anything, show this to your lawyer. You know how she is. Keep this safe, Sarah. My breath caught. It was the first time I'd seen his handwriting since the hospital. My knees buckled, and I had to sit down. I read the note twice, 3 times. My heart ached with something too complicated to name. Grief, vindication, guilt, maybe, even gratitude. Mark knew. On some level, he knew Eleanor wouldn't stop. And despite all his flaws, he had tried. He had tried to protect me the only way he knew how. That night, back at the motel, I didn't sleep again. But I didn't cry either. Instead, I stayed up, rereading the legal document until the words stopped blurring. By sunrise, I had called Angela Flores, my old college roommate who had become a real estate attorney. I scheduled a meeting, because now I had the paperwork and just enough anger to use it. Wednesday afternoon arrived, gray and cold. I was eating a bowl of instant soup in the kitchenette when I heard it, a sharp knock at the door. 3 quick raps, the kind of knock that carries a sense of entitlement. I pulled the curtain just enough to see the outline of Eleanor standing outside, dressed in black like she just walked out of a TV show. Next to her was a man in a gray suit, clipboard in hand. A lawyer. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stepped outside, coat zipped to the chin, my folder tucked firmly under my arm. "Sarah," Eleanor said, smiling thinly. "This is Mr. Langley, my family attorney. We're here to discuss the next steps regarding the house." Next steps? I repeated, my voice even. Eleanor nodded like this was a polite negotiation and not a home invasion staged during my husband's funeral week. Since Mark left no will, his estate, including the house, is subject to division among next of kin. As his mother and sister, we have legal rights. I'm his wife, the only legal spouse. Mr. Langley cleared his throat, already looking uncomfortable. What Mrs. Monroe means is that, without a clear directive, probate law permits— I'm so glad you're both here, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. It saves me a trip to your office. I held up the slim black folder. Eleanor's smile faltered. This is a notarized post-nuptial agreement signed 3 years ago. 2 witnesses. It transfers all shared assets to me, the spouse, in the event of Mark's death. I let the silence sink in. Mr. Langley reached out. May I see that document? No, I said quickly, pulling the folder back. You'll get a copy through official channels. I've already retained counsel. Eleanor's expression cracked. You're bluffing, she hissed. Am I? I asked, stepping back toward my motel door. Because if I'm bluffing, you should feel confident enough to go back to your car and celebrate. But if I'm not, then you've committed trespassing, unlawful entry, and you've tampered with property that doesn't belong to you. Mr. Langley took a step away from her, his discomfort now obvious. You don't get to win this time, Eleanor said, her voice lower now, venom barely concealed. You were never part of our family. You stole my son from us. I tilted my head. He wasn't a trophy. He was a man, and I didn't steal him. You pushed him away the second he stopped living by your script. I didn't wait for her to reply. I turned my back and walked inside, locking the door behind me. From the window, I watched them stand in silence for a few seconds before Eleanor spun around and climbed into her car like a queen in retreat. The lawyer followed, awkward and flustered. They didn't knock again. By Friday morning, the motel room felt like it had absorbed my grief. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and unopened envelopes. I was sitting at the small table, trying to sort out the funeral arrangements. Music, eulogy, seating plan, when I noticed a new envelope. No stamp, no return address. It had been slid under my door sometime during the night. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Inside was a neatly typed document from the county probate court. My name was printed in bold near the top. Sarah Monroe, respondent. My pulse jumped. The letter stated that a formal petition had been filed by Mrs. Eleanor Monroe, Mark's mother, challenging the validity of the property transfer and the post-nuptial agreement. She was accusing me of undue influence, mental distress, and coercion during Mark's final months. I dropped the letter on the table like it burned my skin. The rage that flooded me was slow and hot. Not explosive, not even loud. Just steady. Just final. She was accusing me of manipulating Mark, of exploiting the man I loved in order to steal his house. I picked up my phone and called Angela. I figured you'd call, she said before I could say anything. She's saying I coerced him, I said, my voice flat, that I forced him to sign the postnup. Angela's voice was calm. That's not new. It's what people do when they don't have legal footing. They sling mud and hope something sticks. She wants to take everything. Not just the house, I whispered. She wants to rewrite who he was, who we were. She wants control, Angela corrected. This isn't about money, Sarah. It never was. I stared at the corner of the ceiling, feeling that cold motel air wrap around my ankles. I said,
I want to fight her. Not just stop her. I want to destroy her. Angela paused. Then her tone shifted. Good, but we do it smart. You don't speak to her. You don't respond. You let me build this like a wall, one brick at a time. We hung up. I stared at the court letter for a long time, then folded it, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my suitcase. That afternoon, I received a text message from a number I hadn't seen in over a year. James Harding, Mark's former business partner. Hey, Sarah, I don't want to get involved, but Eleanor reached out. She asked about Mark's mental state during the last few months, said he had a meeting a few months ago and came back pretty out of it. She just wanted to give you a heads up. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Of course I remembered that day. A few months before Mark died, he had come home from a client meeting pale and shaken. He blamed it on stress and too much coffee. But Eleanor, she must have gotten wind of it. She was building a case. If she could convince the court that Mark hadn't been of sound mind, she could unravel everything. That was the moment I remembered something Mark had said, almost offhand, one night after dinner. I have an appointment at St. Michael's next week, neurology, just to rule stuff out. Probably nothing. I hadn't gone with him. He told me not to worry. I scrambled off the bed, yanked open my suitcase, and dumped the documents across the bedspread. I tore through everything: utility bills, mortgage receipts, old birthday cards. And then, tucked inside a pile of unopened mail from a few months ago, I found it. A sealed envelope from St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. I opened it with shaking fingers.
I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside was a sealed letter from St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. Dear Mr. Monroe, it began. Following your recent cognitive assessment, we are pleased to inform you that your results fall within the normal range. No signs of early cognitive decline were detected. I read it 3 times before I finally let out the breath I'd been holding for a week. He had been okay, and now I had proof. Monday morning, 1 week since Mark died. The courthouse on Montgomery Street was cold, even in spring. I met Angela on the steps. Her hair was in a tight bun and her eyes were sharp. Ready? She asked softly. I am, I said. And I was. For the first time in days, I stood with both feet grounded. Inside, the courtroom wasn't full, just a scattering of people. Eleanor was in the front row, dressed in funeral black lace, her posture perfect, a tissue already clutched in her hand like a prop. Olivia sat beside her, head bowed, the perfect daughter in mourning. I didn't look at them. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver glasses and tired eyes, called the session to order. Eleanor's lawyer, a man named Mr. Langley, went first. His voice was careful, gentle, designed to paint Eleanor as a concerned mother, not a bitter one. He spoke of Mark's sudden death, of unanswered questions, of documents signed during times of emotional vulnerability. He avoided the word coercion, but he let it hang in the air like smoke. Eleanor cried once, right on cue. Angela stood slowly when it was our turn. She didn't perform. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid down the facts like cards in a poker game. The notarized legal document, the house deed in my name, the mortgage payments made exclusively from my account, and then the final piece of the puzzle. She handed the judge a copy of the letter from St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. This is dated 3 months before Mr. Monroe's death, and it confirms his full mental capacity. The entire room fell silent. Mr. Langley stammered, tried to pivot. Even so, Your Honor, we must consider the emotional dynamics. Do you have documentation, medical records, any evidence of diminished capacity? He faltered. No, Your Honor. Then I see no grounds, the judge said, already writing. The agreement is legally binding. The deed is in Mrs. Monroe's name.
This house legally belongs to her. Case dismissed. Just like that, the gavel came down. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. A long, slow, silent breath. The kind you don't realize you've been holding until you finally let it go. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a deep blue. Birds chirped in the trees. Eleanor caught up to me on the courthouse steps, her heels clicking like gunshots on stone. "You may have won the house," she said, her voice like glass, "but you'll never erase me. I'm her mother." I turned slowly. "You already erased yourself. You erased yourself the moment you tried to rewrite who he was, the moment you broke into our home and stole his things. Mark knew who you were, Eleanor. That's why he wrote that letter. That's why he signed that document." Her face cracked. Not much, but enough. I leaned in. "And if you come near me again, I won't need a courtroom to protect myself. I've already filed the restraining order." She stepped back, her face twisting in rage. "You can't keep me from his funeral," she hissed. "No," I said, cutting her off. "I'm not vindictive. I'm free." And I walked away, head held high, not once looking back.
The chapel smelled like lilies and cedar. It was a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Mark's heart gave out. The service had been scheduled for noon, but by 11:15 the pews were already filling. Friends, neighbors, a few of Mark's old clients. Many hadn't seen us in years. "I'm so sorry," they whispered as they hugged me. "He loved you so much. He always talked about your garden plans." I nodded, smiled softly, and swallowed the words I couldn't afford to speak. Then I saw them. 2 silhouettes slipping into the back pew, barely noticeable if you weren't looking, but I was. Eleanor and Olivia, dressed in black, perfectly coordinated with hair pinned and veils subtle but unmistakable. They weren't on the guest list. I had made sure of that. The funeral home had assured me they would be stopped at the door, but someone must have looked away. And now, there they were, pretending to belong. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding, not from grief, but from fury. I had buried Mark once already. I would not let them dig him up for show. Angela turned toward me slightly. "Want me to handle it?" she whispered. I shook my head. No, I would do it myself. I walked slowly down the aisle, my heels echoing in the sudden silence. Every head turned, the music paused, even the minister stepped aside, sensing something sacred in motion. When I reached the back, Eleanor looked up. Her smile was small. Olivia's eyes flickered away. "You're not supposed to be here," I said quietly. "We're not leaving," Eleanor replied, her voice low and proud. "I gave birth to him." "Then you should have respected his wishes. I'm his wife, the only one he chose." My voice didn't rise. "I will walk out right now, and I'll take the minister with me. We'll finish the service at a park, at a parking lot, at a kitchen table. I don't care. But you will not sit here and pretend you didn't try to erase him. You don't get to use his death for dignity you never earned." For a second, no one moved. Then Olivia's voice broke the silence. "Mom," she said softly, "let's go." Eleanor turned toward her, stunned. "We're not wanted here," Olivia added. "Let's stop pretending." She stood, and slowly, Eleanor followed. There was no scene, no screaming, just the sound of 2 pairs of heels walking away and the soft click of the chapel door closing behind them. When I turned back toward the altar, the entire room exhaled. The music resumed. I walked slowly to the front, my hand steady. I stood before Mark's urn and finally said goodbye. Not surrounded by liars, not interrupted by venom, but wrapped in silence,
in truth and in the love of people who actually knew who he was. And for the first time since he died, I felt peace. The day after the funeral, the house was silent. I stood at the kitchen sink in Mark's old sweatshirt, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug, the coffee gone cold. Outside the window, the garden was bare, just turned soil and the beginnings of what would come later. I hadn't stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, so when I looked out the front window and saw Eleanor's car parked across the street, I wasn't surprised. She sat still, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I didn't move. I just picked up my mug, walked calmly out onto the front porch, and stood there, barefoot, hair undone, mug in hand. I met her eyes. She flicked her cigarette out the window, the car rumbled to life, and then she drove away. No threats, no shouting, just gone. But I knew it wasn't surrender. It was retreat. I went back inside, locked the door, and exhaled. The day after the funeral, the house was silent. I stood at the kitchen sink, fingers wrapped around a mug, the coffee gone cold. Outside the window, the garden was bare, just turned soil. I turned around, half expecting to see Mark sitting at the table, humming some off-key song, but the chair was empty. I had survived the funeral, survived court, but I hadn't stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. So when I looked out the front window and saw Eleanor's car parked across the street, I wasn't surprised. She sat still, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I didn't move. I just picked up my mug, walked calmly out onto the front porch, and stood there, barefoot, hair undone, mug in hand. I met her eyes. She flicked her cigarette out the window, the car rumbled to life, and then she drove away. No threats, no shouting, just gone. But I knew it wasn't surrender. It was retreat. I went back inside, locked the door, and exhaled. For 3 days, she didn't come back. I spent them cleaning, sorting through Mark's files, touching every drawer and surface he'd once used. The process was brutal. Each receipt a memory, each pen with his bite mark a tiny cut to the chest. On the third afternoon, I found his old gardening notebook. He had drawn marigolds, labeled every seed, and even taped down a packet with a note, "For Sar, one day when you're ready." I wasn't ready, but I went outside anyway. I dug where he marked, turned the soil with bare hands, planted every seed, and watered them gently. I sat beside them as the sun went down. For a moment, I forgot the lawsuits, the accusations, the funeral. I just remembered his hands, his laugh, his stupid gardening hat. And when I went back to the front door that night, I found an envelope. No stamp, no handwriting, just 6 words printed in bold. "This house will always be mine." I laughed, not bitterly, just lightly, with something that sounded like release. She had nothing left. No claim, no proof, just 6 words from a woman who had already been removed from my will, my wedding, my life. I took the paper outside, walked to the garden, dug a small hole under Mark's marigold bed, and buried the letter deep. I covered it with earth and fertilizer. I thought maybe something good would grow from it. I brushed the dirt from my fingers and whispered, "You don't haunt me anymore." Spring came early that year. The garden, once just dark soil and scribbled dreams, was beginning to stir. Shoots pushed through the dirt, small and stubborn green things that fought their way toward the sun. I watched them with coffee in hand, wrapped in Mark's flannel shirt. No makeup, no expectations, just breath. I didn't hear from Eleanor again. It's been a year now since Mark died. The house has changed with the seasons. I painted the guest room a soft green, took down the photos she'd replaced, and put up new photos of Mark and I at the lake. I reopened my interior design business. My clients didn't know my story, but I saw pieces of myself in every one of them. A grieving widow who wanted to repaint her kitchen to feel less like his space. A young woman who just left her fiancé and wanted her apartment to feel like hers again. I designed with care, with vision, with a quiet kind of power. One Saturday morning, I noticed an envelope had arrived by regular mail. Inside was a check from the funeral home. The card inside said, "You handled everything with grace. Mark would have been proud." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting. It was Olivia's. It didn't change the past, but it was something. And something was enough. By early summer, the marigolds bloomed in full, a burst of gold and orange. I sat beside them, barefoot, dirt under my nails, sun on my cheeks, and I whispered the final thing I needed to say. I didn't win because I took something from you, Eleanor. I won because I refused to let you take me. They always say grief fades with time. It doesn't. It changes. It shifts. It softens at the edges, maybe, but it never disappears. It just folds itself into your routine, into the tea you make in the morning, into the silence between songs on the radio. Mark is gone. That is the truth. But so is the woman I used to be. The woman who kept the peace at any cost. That woman died the day Mark did. And in her place, I planted something else. Not revenge, not bitterness, just roots.